Hey, everybody, Miss Dumas here this morning, and I wanted to give you one more tip or one more demonstration about evidence and sourcing before you actually do your DBQ rewrite tomorrow. This time, however, I'm going to use modified DBQ from Unit 4, which is our Age of Exploration unit. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And so this would be the DBQ that I would be writing. Again, 45 minutes, documents 1 through 5. And the prompt here is analyze the effects of the transatlantic trade and its impact on the participating civilizations. So the first thing I need to do is break down this prompt and make sure I know exactly what it's asking for me to do. So analyze the effects basically means to identify what the effects were and explain why those effects happen. So that's a super important part of this prompt. And then I have to ask myself, well, effects of what? Well, it's the effects of transatlantic trade. And transatlantic means across the Atlantic Ocean. So if we're going across the Atlantic Ocean, that is most likely going to mean trade between Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Okay. And then the other part of the prompt that's really important is I need to analyze its impact on participating civilizations. So I think really what this prompt is asking me is how did transatlantic trade impact the civilizations who were participating in it? So what kind of impact did trade have on people in the Americas, Africa, and Europe? And now that I know that, now I can start looking for evidence. And so we're going to scroll down to this first document, document 1, wealth accumulated by the Spanish crown due to colonial possession in the Americas. I don't have an author for this document, so there is no way I'm going to be able to do POV for this document. You have to have an author and know some kind of information. So we're going to take POV right out of the arena. I think it's going to be kind of hard to do audience because I don't know when this document was written or created. So that's going to be a little bit more challenging. Now, I might be able to do historical context in terms of being able to explain why this amount of wealth increased so often. So if I were going to do sourcing, I would source for historical context for this document. But let's first get to evidence. What is this document saying about the impact of transatlantic trade? Well, it looks like it's showing a huge increase in wealth for the Spanish crown. So that would be the impact according to this document, that for the Spaniards, their wealth increased dramatically as a result of this trade. And so if I were going to provide specific evidence from this document to support that argument, what I might say, instead of just saying, hey, the Spanish crown increased their wealth by millions of pesos, that's lame, that's weak evidence. But if I could say something like between 1556 and say 1640, that the Spanish crown was able to accumulate 35, 65, 85 million pesos as a result of colonization, that is a much stronger piece of evidence. And so that's what we want you to do when you go to rewrite. Don't summarize it, but pick specific pieces out. By giving specific dates and giving specific numbers, then my evidence is stronger. So according to this document, the impact it had was making Spain really wealthy. Okay, and I've got great evidence to do that. Now we have document 2. Let's see, the Great Disease Migration, Jeffrey Crowley, 1991. So this is a current document, writing for Newsweek. So I'm not sure historical context is going to work for sourcing here, but we do have the author. We know what he's writing for, so maybe we could do POV or purpose. We'll see. But here's what he says in the document. The disaster began almost as soon as Columbus arrived, fueled mainly by smallpox and measles. Smallpox, the disease that so ravaged Tenochtitlan on the eve of Cortez's final siege, was a particularly efficient killer. Alfred Crosby, author of The Columbian Exchange, likens its effect on American history to that of the Black Death on the history of the Old World. Smallpox made its American debut in 1519 when it struck the Caribbean island of Santo Domingo, killing up to half of the indigenous population. From there, outbreaks spread across the Antilles Island onto the Mexican mainland through the Isthmus of Panama and into South America. Okay, so if I'm the prompt again is asking what kind of impact or how did it impact the people? This one's pretty easy. It impacted the indigenous people of the Americas by killing them. Okay, disease killed them, it ravaged them. And again, when I go to pick out the best piece of information that would support that, we could do something like Alfred Crosby likens its effect to the Black Death. It came to America in 1519 on Santo Domingo, killing half the population. So my evidence is a combination of basically these few sentences, right? I picked it was like the Black Death on Europe. It came to the Americas in 1519 on the island of Santo Domingo, and then killed up to half of the indigenous population. So that's a really strong piece of evidence to show the impact on the indigenous population. Now, for sourcing this document, I think I would want to source this for purpose. I don't really know too much about the author. I mean, I could say, his point of view is simply a factual point of view. He's very plainly explaining the impact that smallpox had on the Native Americans, and that would make sense. He's writing an article called The Great Disease Migration, so he's trying to explain how diseases migrate, and this is why he's telling us how it migrated into the Americas. So that might work. Purpose could simply be is to give the most updated version of disease migration, or maybe he's trying to compare it to another disease in 1991. I don't know. This would not be one of my favorite documents to source, and if I'm having that much of a struggle sourcing it, I probably am going to skip it. Okay. All right. Document 3, diagram outlining the beliefs behind a mercantilist system. So this is just looks like a chart or image of what mercantilism is. And so it's not directly telling me what the impact on any people in the Atlantic world is. It's indirectly telling me about mercantilism. But I know from my study of mercantilism as an AP World student that mercantilism made the mother countries super, super wealthy because they could maximize their exports and minimize their imports. So right now I'm making a connection in my brain thinking, okay, document 1 was an increase in wealth for Spain. Document 3 is basically saying it's mercantilism, which I know is an increase in wealth for the mother country. So now I know at least one of my overall effects, that European nations got wealthy as a result of this transatlantic trade. And I know I can use documents 1 and I can use documents 3 to be able to support that. So super cool. Now, the evidence I would use from this document to support that would be this. I'd say, as one could see with the chart, that the country has far more exports than it would imports, which means it's bringing in more money than it's taking out. So that would be a good piece of evidence. Now, because this is a diagram, it's going to be really hard to source it, especially without an author. But this would be an outstanding document to be able to do EBD, evidence beyond the document, because I know something about mercantilism. So after I gave the evidence about how mercantilism makes a country wealthy, now I can throw in some of my evidence beyond the document, information from my brain. And I could say something that, this mercantilist system was started around the time that colonies were developed, because colonies were seen as a way to enrich the mother countries, and that mother countries such as Spain would institute the quinto, which is a 1/5 tax on the product, which would bring even more money into the European nations. And so that is, if you see a document where you legitimately do not feel like you can source it, try to throw a piece of evidence beyond the document in to help tie that back to an argument. And for this document, it worked really, really well. Okay, very cool. So document 4, I'm going on to, this is from Bartolome de las Casas. He was a young priest who did participate in the conquest of Cuba, and he transcribed Columbus's journal. Okay, so we know this guy was a priest, so he's Christian. We know he was there. I mean, he transcribed Columbus's journal, so it's definitely a first-hand account. Let's see what he says. The Spaniards grew more conceited every day, and after a while refused to walk any distance. They rode on the backs of Indians if they were in a hurry, or were carried on hammocks by Indians running in relays. They thought nothing of knifing Indians by tens and twenties and cutting off slices of them to test the sharpness of their blades. Ugh. They, the Indians, suffered and died in the mines, and other laborers in desperate silence, knowing not a soul in the world to whom they could turn for help. In 1508, there were 60,000 people living on the island of Hispaniola, including the Indians. So that from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. Who in future generations will believe this? I myself, writing it as a knowledgeable eyewitness, can hardly believe it. Okay, so after reading this document, it's very clear he's talking about negative impact on the indigenous population. Now, it doesn't quite go hand in hand with document 2 up here, where the Native Americans died of smallpox. But there is a statement that I could say something like, transatlantic trade decimated the population of the Native Americans. And then I could use evidence from document 2 and evidence from document 4 to prove that. And so, excuse me, so what would be the best piece of evidence or pieces of evidence that would show the decimation of the Native American population? Well, you could use this part here, nothing of knifing Indians by tens and twenties. You could also then add, the Indians suffered and died in the mines. And then this biggest piece, there were 60,000 people living in 308 or 1508, but there were 3 million who had lived there previously. So the best pieces of evidence, if you really wanted to make this the best pieces of evidence, I would at least include this part, and I would include this part. Have a couple pieces to make that evidence even stronger. And that really does show the decimation of the Native American population. So already I know I have two groupings. One grouping is that the effect it had on European countries was that it made it wealthy on the people. And I can use documents, I believe documents 1 and 3 for that. And that decimated the Native American population. I can use documents 2 and 4 for that. Woo! So I already have 4 documents used. Fantastic. I know the best pieces of evidence to support my points that I'm trying to make. I've got one sourcing going, and I'm going to actually source this document because I know a lot about this guy, right? I know that he is obviously Spanish. I know that he is a priest, so he believes in Christianity, and I know that he was there. So I could attack this from a few different ways. I could attack it for POV in terms of credibility. And I could say that, hey, we can trust Bartolome de las Casas that he's actually being 100% truthful because he was there during this time. I mean, he participated in the conquest of Cuba. He was, by Columbus. And so therefore, if he says that the Native American population was decimated, then it was most likely decimated. And so you could attack it from the POV standpoint. You could also attack it from a purpose standpoint. And you could say, hey, the reason De las Casas wrote this is because he was disgusted. I mean, you can see it in his language, disgusted by the Spanish treatment of Native Americans and absolutely appalled that millions of people were killed as a result of the Spanish, millions of Native Americans were killed as a result of Spanish colonization. And so therefore he is writing this because he wants this to stop, right? He is transcribing this and doing this because he wants the Spanish crown to get wind of this and stop these abuses. And so you could attack document 4 from a variety of different ways. You could even do historical context and say, hey, one of the reasons that Spain wanted to conquer Cuba is to gain more colonies in the Americas, because by gaining colonies, they could accomplish their goal of gold, glory, and God. However, in the process of doing this, it did lead to the decimation of millions of Native Americans. So you're tying it back to the argument. But any of those would work great. And so now we already know we have our 2 groupings. We know what evidence we're going to use. We've sourced at least 2 documents, so we are on the right track. Plus we have EBD. So really all we need to do now is see if we can find another EBD to try to earn maximum points. And we have one more document to do. So let's talk about it. Document 5. This is from Merrick Whitcomb, The Gold of the Indies, 1559, the University of Pennsylvania. So it looks like this guy, he edited probably some kind of book, probably a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. So we know this is not a primary source document. Let's see what he says. Or it could be a she, I actually don't know. From New Spain are obtained gold, silver, and other things. 1/5 of all the profits go to the king. Great quantities of gold and silver used to be out in the open with all of it gone. Now silver and gold have to be mined. The work is hard and the Spaniards are not willing to do the work. Natives who have become Christians are not allowed to be forced to do the work because the emperor freed them. So now it is necessary to acquire Negro slaves, enslaved Africans, who are brought from the coasts of Africa. Their masters are making them work too hard and giving them too little to eat. They fall sick and the greater part of them die. Oh, this is a cool document because we can use it in two different ways. We can either use it as a way to show that Spain is gaining wealth, which we could then use this information right here to be able to support that. Or we could say, hey, not only did the European colonization affect the Americas, it affected Africa as well. And then we can use this information to show that it was having a negative impact on Africans as well. And the best piece of evidence, obviously, would be, let's see, the work is hard, that the natives can't work, so they bring over Negro slaves who are brought from Africa. They're making them work too hard. And so this is a great piece of evidence to show that it's decimating the African population as well. So I'm going to use a little bit of a combination of both pieces, the work being too hard and then that sentence down there. Excuse my coughing. Now, I already have two sourcings, right? And I have one EBD, and I know that I need to do two EBDs. So I'm going to try to figure out what evidence beyond the document I can also add that would show the Native American populations were decimated by transatlantic trade. So I know a lot about the Atlantic slave trade because we studied it for so much. So I might bring in the idea that, hey, it wasn't just working in the mines that destroyed the African population. It was also the sugar plantations. The fact that because Africans were used to Caribbean climate, Africans were brought over to work on the sugar plantations in the Caribbean, and sugar was extremely labor intensive. They were slaves, they were treated like animals, they were beaten. Thus leading to a lot of deaths of Africans. And so that's a way for me to continue my argument saying, hey, it's not just from this document. There are other things I know that show the African population was decimated as well. So that's how I might bring in another piece of evidence beyond the document. And so by the time I wrap this all up, what I know is that my three groupings are going to be that it increased the wealth for Europeans, it decimated the Native American population, and dramatically impacted the population of Africa. So I just make that into my thesis, right? The effects of the transatlantic trade on Europeans was that it increased the wealth of Europeans. However, it decimated the Native American population in the Americas, and then also hurt the African population as well. There's my thesis statement. I know my three groupings. Documents 1 and documents 3 are going to be used to show an increase in wealth for Europe. Documents 2 and documents 4 are going to be used to show the decimation of the Native American population. And then document 5 will be used to show the decimation of the African population as well. And with a 5-document DBQ, as long as you have 2 body paragraphs that have 2 documents each in them, you can't have a third body paragraph with only 1 document, and that will be okay. And then I also know what I'm going to do is I'm going to source document 1 for historical context and explain why we had so much increase in wealth during this time period, the opening of silver mines, the growing of tobacco in the Caribbean. There is historical context. I'm not going to do document 2 because it was way too challenging. Document 3, I decided I was going to use EBD for. So when I give the evidence of document 3 in my paragraph, After the evidence, I'm going to throw in my EBD for it. And then document 4 was where I said I'm going to do another sourcing. I can source it for purpose or POV. And then document 5 is where I'm going to do another of my EBD. So I've got the structure of my essay ready to go. Now all I need to do is write it. And so that's what I will show you with the next video. So I'm hoping by you guys seeing me going through the process that you understand how to do this a little bit more effectively, how you go through each document to find that great evidence, how you determine what kind of sourcing to do or whether you should do evidence beyond the documents. As always, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, absolutely contact me. And other than that, I hope you guys have a great day.